Well met everyone. I am Rich the Lich, and in today's video, I want to help new DMs, old DMs, dungeon masters get through the process of picking something. Where do you begin? How do you start? Let's use this sort of PowerPoint presentation, if you will, and the words on screen to jump into this. First and foremost, the 4 points: fun, excitement, energy, and inspiration. Those 4 things should be the foundation upon all that you do when you journey into the tabletop role-playing in the D&D space. Ignore my words. Ignore the words of any other person on YouTube, any article you read. Ignore it all, because these 4 override everything. If it doesn't sound fun to you, it doesn't matter who told you to use it. If it doesn't sound exciting to you, it doesn't matter if it's supposed to be the best thing for new players. If it doesn't feed you with energy, I always say, in your life, there's 2 types of people. Those that when they walk into the room, the energy level increases, and those that when they walk out of the room, the energy level increases. Surround yourself with the sort of people and the sort of things that increase the energy when they walk into the room. When you grab that book off the shelf, when you read that thing, when you watch that thing, that's not watching, that's grabbing. When you watch that thing, does it increase your energy level? And finally, go to your sources of inspiration. And most importantly, it does not have to be Dungeons and Dragons. It can be, of course. I mean, I'm fortunate that my office, my creative space, my man cave, if you will, has no shortage of inspiration. Yes, it's the same things that I'm seeing day after day, but there's enough shit in here that I can pull inspiration from anywhere. And that's all I need. So the point of these 4 words here are: find the spark regardless of where it comes from, and adhere to that, even if it's something other than what I'm covering in the rest of this video. Okay? But let's jump into this. Let's get a little more practical. There's 4 big questions that you need to ask, because they kind of drive the flow chart, if you will, the direction that you want to go. Are you entirely new to D&D? Maybe you're entirely new to tabletop role-playing. Are you a new dungeon master? You've played D&D before, maybe even 5th edition, but you've only played. See, this is your first journey wearing the hat of the dungeon master. This is your first journey on that side of the screen. Are you new to 5e? So maybe you have both played and been a player and a dungeon master, Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games, but you've never played 5th edition before. So what are the various considerations versus the first 2? And finally, maybe you're not new to any of it, really. You've been a player, you've been a dungeon master, you've played in 5th edition, you've run 5th edition. But maybe you have a new group of players. You're playing with a new group, or there's just a few key players that are now gone that you usually run and play with, and now you have some new people sitting at your table. Okay? So let's go over, considering those 4 things. Those are the big questions you always want to ask, because they're going to help drive the sort of direction that you might want to go. And remember, I say might want to go. There is no right, wrong, best, only way. This is just what I would do as a veteran dungeon master that has been playing Dungeons and Dragons for better part of 40 years. I have been running as the role of a dungeon master for 30 plus years. And I have been playing in 5th edition basically since the edition released. So I'm very current, and I'm on my 7th consecutive campaign. It's what I do, okay? So take that for whatever value that is to you. Here we go. The first one. If you are entirely new to D&D, while you may be excited to build your own, don't juggle building a story, managing a group, learning the game, and world building all at the same time. If you're entirely new to the hobby, well, at least D&D, maybe you've played other tabletop role-playing games, World of Darkness or something like that, but you're new to D&D,
and you're just excited about it, right? You've watched really good DMs, Matt Mercer, Brendan Lee Mulligan, Jeff Canada, sorry, Deborah Ann Wool. You've watched DMs do their thing, and you're excited about this game that you've heard of. You've heard about it for 40 years, you just never tried it, and you're new to D&D. Now is not the time to try and become Tolkien and create your own world, even if you have something brewing. There is a huge separation, and I caution you against using your own world or starting to build your own world for the purposes of D&D. Creating a novel, writing a book, and world building as Brandon Sanderson does, as Patrick Rothfuss does, that's very different than what you need to actually bring to the table. Remember, you're simultaneously having to learn the rules of this game. You're having to cat herd and juggle players, manage a group, how to tell a story, pacing. You're interacting with this world differently than you would if you were just writing it or creating a book that someone's going to read on their own time. So I don't want to ever have a blank statement of don't do this, but don't create your own world, okay? Use something pre-published. And on that note, when using pre-published, something that someone has already created, try and stick with official work. Now, there is some great stuff out there, DM's Guild and many other resources. You can just Google that. But I recommend that you go with stuff that has the fit and finish and the resources behind it, which is to say, use something pre-published for your first journey as a new dungeon master, new to D&D. Use something that's already been written and use one of the official books that were created, the stuff you can buy on Amazon, your local gaming store, or digitally through D&D Beyond. Okay, because there is a level of fit, finish, resources behind it, play testing, and it's all built considering the 5th edition rule set. Okay, so use something pre-published and use something official. Now, once you do that, if you were to look through the list, if you will, on D&D Beyond, there's things called sources and then there's adventures. What do I mean by that, and which one should you lean towards? Here's an idea of some sources, okay? These are worlds, basically. So what I mean by sources is you're going to these pre-published things. Remember, you're new to D&D, so you're not building your own thing. These are worlds that already have established content. And yes, many of these world books, they're bigger, they're thicker. They have more content than you would ever need for a single adventure or a couple of sessions. And they have multiple campaigns worth of content. It's an entire world book. But within it, you may, of course, find one-shots or quick adventures to get you started in the world, to give you and your players a feel for it. Things to get your feet wet and just try it out. But they're still worlds, fully established things. And some of these, like Forgotten Realms or Eberron or something like that, these things have been around for 30 plus years. So there's a ridiculous amount of content, but they're brought into, these are all worlds that are, or at least coming soon with Spelljammer, they're all worlds that have already been brought into the 5th edition rule set, okay? You have Eberron. I'm not going to go over, that's beyond the scope of this video, the strengths and weaknesses of each of these, but dare I say, I'm going to leave this list to 7. There's other worlds out there if you were to look, especially independent and third-party stuff, but remember I said you want to really try and stick with officially published stuff. There are some great worlds out there like Midgard and Dragongrin and maybe some others that, and some that are on the way, I think, from Chris Metzen, the Blizzard creative director guy, right? War Chief Gaming, I think, is what his new studio is, and there's a new world, Ouroboros or something like this. But anyway, I recommend sticking with one of these 7. If you're looking for a world book, which means that you're going to have to kind of formulate your own stories and your own adventures within this world. And you have a lot of legwork to do. You have a lot of reading to do. But I recommend sticking with either Eberron, Critical Role, which can go many different directions, whether you're going to do Call of the Netherdeep, whether you're going to go Wildmount, whether you're going to go Tal'Dorei, okay? Forgotten Realms is a juggernaut. The Worlds of Ravenloft, okay? Whether you just narrow that down to a specific adventure, such as Curse of Strahd, or you go into the realms of Ravenloft. Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, which is Magic the Gathering inspired. Theros, Mythic Odysseys of Theros, which is also Magic the Gathering inspired. Or perhaps you just wait, learn a bit more about the game, read more books, gather more miniatures and terrain and whatnot, and wait for Spelljammer to be released. Okay?
Those are the sources. Those are the big juggernaut of worlds that you can pull from. Okay? Now, if you want to zoom in a lot more and find a specific adventure, the big difference here is while there are adventures in those sources, these adventure books are the type of things that have little blurbs and paragraphs that say, when your PCs go through that door, read this. When they approach the NPC in the forest, read that. Okay? The one that's considered, really good for new players, for people to just get a feel for the game of D&D in 5th edition, is Lost Mines of Phandelver. I believe this is entirely free. So you can Google that and find the PDFs or D&D Beyond or whatever. The rest of these, you basically have to purchase this content. So that is something that sort of goes without saying, right? You can, of course, just simply use what you have or what your players have. But if you're going to invest some money, this is the list of things I'd look into. You can maybe run Waterdeep Dragon Heist. It always goes back to that first slide, which is find your source of inspiration, whatever gets you the most excited, whatever sounds the most fun. It doesn't matter if this is supposed to be newbie friendly or not. If you don't want to run Lost Mines of Phandelver, which is, going through goblin warrens and whatnot, and you want dragons and crazy underground dungeons, run something that is fitting of underground dungeons. If you want something in the ocean, then go with that. Okay? Waterdeep Dragon Heist, Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage, The Ghosts of Saltmarsh, Candlekeep Mysteries, Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus, Storm King's Thunder, and Wild Beyond the Witchlight. Simply take any one of those, Google it, and you'll get a little bit of a snippet, a one sentence or paragraph that will kind of give you an idea of what the hell this sort of thing is. Okay? Remember the big separator, sources, you got to kind of come up with your own adventures. Adventures basically handhold you from levels 1 through whatever, beginning to end, telling you what to do, how to do it. Okay? Now, on the note of adventures and sources, where should you go? Here's one exercise that you can use that will help guide your direction. And this ties heavily into inspiration, fun, excitement. Simply use one of 7 types of terrain and find the story, the adventure, the source, the world. And of course, many of these worlds, Forgotten Realms, Eberron, and so on, have every one of these terrain types within them. But to help narrow down to a specific chapter within that book, or to narrow down to a specific adventure, find the type of terrain that gets you and your players most excited, depending on a movie you just saw. Maybe you just saw Dune, so you want to run deserts. Maybe you've been playing a certain map in a certain MMO, and you want to run Viking, Norse, you just watched The Northmen. That screams ice, perhaps, right? Maybe all you know about D&D is you want to run demons and devils and Balrog of Morgoth. Maybe that leads you directly towards the terrain of fire. So what adventure, what source book is going to help inspire you that leans into that magma, that molten, that oppressive heat? So use these 7 pieces of terrain: dark and ruinous, desert, fire, forest, ice, plains, or something underwater. Okay? Regardless of whether you're a new DM, new to 5th edition, or otherwise, you want to make sure you have your tools. At its core, at the base, you just need some pencils and paper. They go a very, very long way. Of course, you want dice. That is how you adjudicate the story that's being told. You say something to your players react to that. You don't just let them do whatever it is they say. They tell you what they want to do, and then the dice tell you how that plays out. Were they successful in that? Did they fail and otherwise? So gather up some dice. Of course, you have your D20, your D12s, your D10s, D8s, D6s, and D4s. That's all you need. For terrain, I'm fortunate that I have a lot of Dwarven Forge. A lot. Thousands, almost upwards of $10,000 already in Dwarven Forge. Or in Warlock tiles. You can build it yourself. Again, beyond the scope of this video to talk about all the different types of terrain, look at Black Magic Craft, DM Scotty, Runehammer. There's many resources out there that'll help you build your own stuff out of pink foam or insulation foam. Many places you can go to buy it. With 3D printing right now, you can find anything you need on Etsy and otherwise. And then, of course, again, there's the juggernaut of Dwarven Forge, which is the hand-sculpted terrain, but it's expensive. But it might be sufficient to just buy a Chessex map, a dry erase battle map. Okay? What minis are you going to use? Are you going to use pre-painted actual Nozors and WizKids miniatures? Are you going to paint them yourself? Do you have the time for that? Do you have the skill set for that? Maybe you just need some Pathfinder pawns. They're sufficient. They're durable as well. And then kind of leaning back into what sources what adventures do you pick? What do you have on your shelf? What books do you have access to? What books do you need? You really only need the Player's Handbook, the DMG, and the Monster Manual. And if you're new to this journey, ignore the DMG. There's a wealth of information for Dungeon Masters, hence Dungeon Master's Guide. But for right now, just understand the Player's Handbook. Now, you don't need to read and digest all the rules. I've been doing this for a really long time, and I still have to refer to the book. So don't try and commit everything in the Player's Handbook to memory before you start playing. Get started. But just read through the Player's Handbook, and even though it says Player's Handbook, that's the book both players and Dungeon Masters want to digest to get going. Okay, you don't need all the books out there, and you definitely don't need them in hardcover format. You can find free adventures that come from this book, PDF files, digital versions, D&D Beyond, and otherwise. Okay, but gather up your tools. Now, we just talked about, and many of these things I just went over apply to these other categories as well. The first one was, of course, are you new to D&D? But maybe you're not new to D&D, you've been playing, but this is your first time as a Dungeon Master. Here's the following points to consider. If you have lots of time before your first session, and I'm talking weeks, maybe upwards of months, you can build your own world. You're just a new DM, but you're not new to the hobby and you're not new as a player. You know the game as a player, but you haven't jumped to the other side of the screen until now. Regardless, you have enough of an idea of what the game is, what D&D is, that you might be able to invest some time into creating your own world. You don't have to stick with pre-published. You have some familiarity. But again, only venture down that route of building your own world and your own adventure if you have a lot of time. If your game is tomorrow, you're not going to have time to do that. Find something pre-published. On that note of how much time do you have to build your own world, prep goes a long way. Do you have time to invest into watching videos? Mine, plug in myself here, and also Matt Colville's, and also just watch videos of how the best DMs out there do it. Matt Mercer, Deborah Ann Woll, Jeff Kanata, Chris Perkins, Brennan Lee Mulligan. Watch how they run. If you have a lot of prep time and time before your session's going to start, before your first adventure begins, you can build your own things and kind of do some research. And maybe at the end of that research, you might find that it's overwhelming and daunting for you. Maybe you do want to pick something off the shelf already. As a new DM, you also want to have a session 0. Okay? What that means is the game hasn't started, but it's time to go over house rules. And most importantly, it's time to detail the style of game that you're interested in playing. And you also want to hear the preferences of your players. What are you guys looking for? Because that's going to inform the direction you go of. Do you need to build it yourself? Do you want to use something pre-published, but you need to buy that book? You don't have, all you have on your shelf is Curse of Strahd, but your players don't want to play something kind of dark and brooding. They want heavy combat and very arcade style, happy-go-lucky, just have fun. The Shire with some fights. That's not Curse of Strahd. But talk over what style of game are you interested in playing. But really adhere to it and really respect your own wishes, not just your players. Remember, back to slide number 1, you have to have good energy and excitement as well. Combined, after going over everything in session 0, you then have the fuel you need to determine whether you need to build or you can use something pre-published that's going to fit the style that you guys are looking for. And again, you can go back to those 7 types of terrain as a launch point. They want something that feels very, almost like a survival game, right? PUBG or Ark, I think it's called, right? Dead by Daylight or something like that. Very low on resources, not high fantasy. Maybe desert landscape, something post-apocalyptic fits the bill better than, druids and magic and floating cities above the forest, okay? Now, you're not new to D&D and you're not a new DM, but you are new to 5th edition. In this particular case, the floodgates are open. You basically can use or build anything that inspires you and your players. I would behoove you to read through most of the player's handbook and then read and reread the adventure ahead of time if you're going to use something pre-published. Know the rules. Remember, you know the game and you know how you work as a dungeon master, what your strengths and weaknesses are. You just need to learn the system of 5th edition. And there are some drastic changes from 3rd and 4th. So know the rules. The flavor, flash, and flare of how you run and your the good and bad, you know all that because you've done this before. And then this is a big one. Truly consider whether 5th edition or even D&D is even going to be the right fit for the style of game you're trying to play. Determine the style of game that you're looking for, heavy combat, social, whatever. Then maybe narrow it down to a terrain type, what terrain type is going to fit. And then that might help point you in the direction of what source book, what world either you need to build or are you going to run, and what adventure you're going to run. But being that you're familiar with other editions of D&D and you're familiar as a dungeon master, you might find that 5th edition is not the appropriate system. As good as 5e is, one thing I will say which is extremely important, it's not a fit. The style of just, not even the world or the adventure, the rule set, the mechanics of 5th edition is not a good fit for every table. And you need to determine that, okay? That's a real make or break point. If you choose the wrong system, doesn't mean you don't have to, that you have to not play D&D. You can play D&D, but you might need to run something like old school, 1st edition, 2nd edition stuff, okay? Finally, the only thing that's new to you is a new group. You're just not familiar with the people that you're going to be telling the story to. Maybe it's the entire group, or there's a couple of new players. During session 0 or before that, take a vote as to which of the 3 pillars of gameplay the group is most excited about. The 3 pillars of 5e D&D is social, exploration, and combat. That's going to inform the amount of terrain, the amount of miniatures you need. If they want to role play and talk and just explore the world a lot more than fighting, you maybe don't need as many knickknacks. Hell, you might not even use your dice during most of the session. Okay, but that helps inform. If they want heavy combat, you might start leaning into like what Warhammer 40k or Warhammer Fantasy does and turn this into just battle terrain. Okay? Now, lean into those pillars, social, exploration, or combat, but don't forget about you as the DM and your strengths and what you prefer. If you're not excited about what the group is playing, the energy at the table is going to reflect that. At the end of the day, you as the dungeon master set the standard, set the base of energy and inspiration for the group. If the group is at a lull or they're not feeling it, you can change that based on your excitement. If the group is excited and you're not feeling it, you'll drop their excitement level very quickly. Okay? That's it. Those are the points of consideration, things to think through. Hopefully something here gives you enough to launch off of, that you have some direction as to where to go and what to pull off the shelf, what D&D Beyond book to click on, what to buy, and whether you're ready or not, whether someone else needs to take up the mantle of Dungeon Master, or maybe you've been ready the whole time and you've been waiting for something that you didn't need to wait for and you could have started yesterday, in which case, just get up and running. Grab your pencils, grab your papers, grab your dice, start rolling and start having fun. Because one thing I've learned in 40 years, no matter how over-prepared you are or under-prepared, the game, as long as you're having fun, as long as you're excited, as long as you're inspired, and whatever the first one, the fourth point was, as long as you have those 4 points in the very beginning, you'll figure it out as you go. Just get started. See you later.